talking about some
For
eggs.
civilians bringing eggs.
Okay. Uh, the civilians would run across the street and hand a GI an egg and run back. The Germans didn't stop them, but I think if they had stood there and started, then the Germans would have hollered. But that, or they'd bring them a drink of cognac, and I never could do it. But some of these guys could take a raw egg and they'd punch a little hole in one end and punch a little hole in the other and suck the goodie out of it. Uh, you can pass me on that. I didn't, but they were doing it, and and these French people wanted to be helpful. They wanted to do something, but of course the Germans wouldn't let them. They loaded us onto trucks, and from there we went to Reims, France, where we were loaded on to what's known then and still is, I guess, as rail cars known as 48s, which was, you probably are familiar with this term that was an endearment term, I guess you might say, that was given to these cars back in World War I when they could either load 40 men or 8 horses. And we went from there by train then and closed up cars to the first transit camp.
And then where did you go from there?
Okay, the first transit camp, I never can remember whether it's either Moosburg or Muhlenberg, but we went to both of them. We went to one, and these were big camps that with barn-like buildings and straw mattresses or whatnot. And this again was, you went in with a whole group of people and you went out with a different group. The Germans were good about, not letting people develop, I guess, together. But when we got there, we were offloaded off the train in kind of a holding area, and it's a beautiful sunny day, as I remember. There's a big, wide open area, almost like a lawn or pasture or something. And then there was some buildings on beyond that, and about halfway in between was a card table with 2 German officers sitting behind it. And each person was required to go and stand in front of this table and be interrogated. Well, the interrogations were pretty short because they pretty well knew what outfits we were from and whatnot. And one of them, the officer would say, "Your papers." And they always talked about papers. I've thought about it since then. We carry driver's license and things like that now, but in Europe they were always talking about your papers. So whatever papers I had in my pockets, I put on the table there. Whatever, anything else I had in my pockets. And he fiddled through it a little bit. And after a while, I says, if you're through with this junk, I'll pick it up. He said, "Don't get cheeky." So the other officer never said anything. He just sat at any rate. So from there, he was finished. I put all the stuff back in my pockets and went from there into this next building, which we were required to disrobe, undress, take our clothes off, in other words, and go through a shower wash. And we may have even gotten sprayed or whatnot. I know we got some shots. And one German medic looked at me and says, "Du Juden, are you Jewish?" And I just says, "Huh?" Like that. And it was never brought up again. At any rate, from there, we went, we got some clothes of some sort. And after we were at that camp for a couple of days or so, we then were loaded onto trains again and went to the other one. Again, I can't remember which one was Moosburg and which was Muhlenberg, but we went to the other one, whichever one it was. And I was there for several days, I guess. In the first camp, I'll remember, though, it was really pretty hot outside, and we got a little bit of German bread and whatnot, and we'd slice it real thin and we'd put it on a pole or something outside, and it would be like toast in a little bit. But they had these camps divided, this one divided in particular. And on one side of the fence, barbed wire fence or whatever, was Russian soldiers. And they were really mean to them. On the other side, Americans, British, Australians, New Zealanders, you know. But the Russian soldiers, if a German guard was walking through the Russian side of the compound and the Russian soldier was in his way, instead of telling him to move, he might just hit him in the back of the head with his rifle and just keep walking. They really were brutal to him. At any rate, from there, as I say, I went to the other camp. The other camp was also a very large camp. And I don't know if you've seen the movie The Great Escape or something else. And you know how they talked about having, what do you call it, kind of a group of people that were in charge of prisoners that were kind of in charge of whatnot. Well, I don't know if they had really the same thing at this camp, but one morning 3 guys came around to see me, and they had some writing paper, and this says you need to write your folks, let your folks know where you are and that you're all right. And I thought about writing my girlfriend. This says, no, you write your folks. So I had a it was more like a postcard. And by the way, I have a copy of the book I wrote about my experiences, and I have some of that in that book. At any rate, so I did, and you know, and they told us a little bit about the camp operation and that sort of thing. That was about as far as it went. But one other thing, my dad always liked to do, like, you know, unusual foods and this, that, and the other. And our hometown, we didn't get a lot of that, but I had found out about Limburger cheese. He loved it. That stuff smells awful, but at any rate. And they came around one day, the Germans did, for food, and they gave us these cans of cheese. And they were cans about that deep and about that big around, and with both ends bulged out, just puffed out. And you could take a knife and hit the end of it, and it would just spray. And a lot of those guys wouldn't eat. I had a lot of that cheese. I really enjoyed it because I loved it. At any rate, one afternoon or one evening, they called you by name. And they called 80 of us out, lined us up, and they said, okay, you're going to be taken to a work camp. And but first, this German officer was standing up on this pedestal or whatever. Excuse me. And he said, now, it's against the German federal law for people of the Jewish faith to work in Germany. And anybody that's of Jewish faith, is please step out. Please just step out of line. And he called out some names like Goldstein and Goldberg and some other Jewish-sounding names. Well, he didn't call my name. And in fact, I had registered as I wasn't a martyr, I guess. So I had registered as Protestant when I got there anyway. So at any rate, I just kept my mouth shut. I never have heard from any of those people or anybody that was Jewish that was in one of those camps. There may have been some that got by, but I don't know. At any rate, so we loaded up on trains and we went to a town called Adolf, Germany. Excuse me. About 60 kilometers west of the Czechoslovakian border. And there was about 80 of us. And we went to, would you believe, Camp 4F. It just happened to be the designation. It might be interesting to note, and I didn't give you a chance to ask any questions, but please don't interrupt me if you like. But it might be interesting to note that officers, and I believe non-coms were included in this, were not permitted to work. They also had some camps they call Luft camps for flyers. I don't know whether those guys, well, I guess most of those guys were either non-coms or officers anyway. But we were, so there was no officers or non-coms in our group. The camp was interesting. Would you like me to tell you about the camp?
Yes, please.
The camp was a U-shape, one-story huts with a small, we call it yard in between. There was a small building at the end of the U, but away from it a little bit. And this was where the German corporal who was in charge of the camp and his staff either stayed or worked or whatever. That was his office. The place was fenced in, typically, and it was right beside, well, there was a real high embankment, and on top of this was a rail line. We were right beside a coaling station and a switching yard and a roundhouse. Roundhouse is where they repair engines. And of course, back then, all they were using were coal-fired engines in that area. So, and we were leased to the railroad by the German government. We were leased to the railroad, which I don't know if it was owned by the government too, I guess, but anyway. And the switch track was right beside us, so it put us down below it, you might say. And I'll tell you a minute about that. The way they switched the cars, they would back a long line of freight cars up this incline and set the brakes on all of them. They'd move the engine away, and then one by one they would unhook them and let the brakes off, and that would let the car flow out to wherever they wanted to go in this switching yard. We had about, out of the 80 people, they had us divided up basically equally. I think there's 4 rooms. We had a day room or living room where we had they had tables around the wall, and each person had a space at the table that, and we all had somehow or other we had acquired a box that we had our worldly possessions in, quite frankly, everything we had. And that room was open to us while we were, off duty, while we were in camp. And we could free whatever. Then there was another room, was a sleeping room with bunks in it. Double-decker bunks. And at 9 o'clock, with the lights out, you put on your underwear and you had on your underwear and your overcoat and your shoes. Yeah. And that's what you went into the sleeping room with. And then, of course, it was locked up for the night. And then, of course, in somewhere in that complex, they had a fairly large latrine. So that was the way the camp, but you could walk from one all the way around, all the way through. The German guards, well, were fairly decent. There's 1 or 2 of them. There was a little white-headed guy that was always screaming and hollering, and nobody liked him. There's another guy that we called Skullface that he looked like that's what his face looked like. These guys were, and then there was another fellow that looked like a family guy, and he was always friendly and trying to talk, But these were the older soldiers, I guess. They call them the Volkssturm, like the home guard, I guess, kind of, at any rate. So that's basically what the camp was like.
And what did they have you doing on a daily basis?
Excuse me. There were about 4 guys that worked in the coaling station, shoveling coal back and forth. Now, I guess I did that a few times, but not much. There were 2 or 3 or 4 that worked in the roundhouse, helping the people working on the engines. And I think all this was maybe kind of against the Geneva Convention because we were helping their war effort, but I guess we were a lot better off doing that than doing what the other people were that just sitting on there, waiting, doing nothing. Then they had us in teams, the rest of us in teams of 15 or 20 or whatever, doing section labor. This is, of course, repairing the tracks or whatnot. In Germany, they were using aggregate to make the road beds, the track beds for the rails, and they used metal cross ties. We were used to seeing wood cross ties and cinders over here. These were metal cross ties, and it was like just the top half of the cross tie, and the under half was just hollow. There's no bottom, and they clamped the rails. They had a clamp like this with a bolt instead of, here we used spikes, but there they had a bolt, and we would bolt them down. And what we'd do is this German workmaster, we would get there, we would ride on a train to wherever the place was they wanted us to work, and this German workmaster would he'd get down and on his knees and sight down the track to see if it was level or needed adjusting. And I guess they had already determined where these spots were. And then we had a jack we'd put under the rail and we'd jack it up. And then we would drive these. We used a thing we called a haka. It was like what a pick looks like, where you use for digging ditches with a spike on either end. Well, these had a spike on one end, and the other end, instead of having a spike, it came out and had a club on the end. So we would drive the stones up under the cross ties to raise it up, or we'd use a pitchfork to dig some out. And he'd put his, he'd lean, he'd put his head down on the rail and sight down the rail to see when it was level and stop. It was kind of funny. He had a pipe, and he'd have this pipe hanging over, a curved pipe. It was hanging over the edge of the rail as he was sighting down. And he was not a hard person or whatnot. He was fairly easy. Of course, they still had the guards there, but I'll never forget, he gave me one of these pipes. I think he thought I was going to be able to give him some tobacco that we got. I've often wished I hadn't lost that pipe just to have it as a show, but I really bummed, I think, some of the crappy tobacco they had off of him. We were getting not American, but International Red Cross parcels, and we got about one a month, and for two people, we'd have to divide it between two of us. I have an idea, maybe the Germans were getting the others, I'm not sure, but at any rate. They were pretty nice. They had a can of powdered milk. They had a very important thing. They had 2 packs of cigarettes. This was very important back then. They had some wafers. And by the way, we learned to make pancakes by soaking one of those wafers. They were about that big around, and soak them in some of that powdered in milk overnight. And the next morning they'd be nice and big, and you could. We had a big pot-bellied stove in each one of these rooms, and we'd use it for cooking whatever we had to cook, as well as for heat and whatnot. And this brings up another story in a minute. But at any rate, and they had in the packages, they had those. They had, I believe a package of coffee, a bar of soap. Maybe something else. Something else tinned. I've forgotten what, but at any rate, it turned out that the coffee, the soap, and the cigarettes were like gold. We were riding a work train every day. We'd ride out, and then when we'd come back in the evening, we'd ride it back to the station and then walk back to where we were housed, And as we were riding back, there was some, what I refer to them as Czech linemen, people, Czechoslovakians that worked on the telephone lines or telegraph lines along the track. And they had a deal with the German bakers to buy bread, and these were these nice big loaves of bread like this. And it was, of course, obviously it was against the law for us to deal on the black market, but we did. And a pack of cigarettes or a bar of soap or a pound of coffee would buy a loaf of bread. Now, some of the guys were afraid to do that, but I didn't think it made much difference. We got to the point where we would, it got to be a real commerce. You give me your pack of cigarettes plus two cigarettes for me to keep, and I'd bring you in a loaf of bread. It's just that easy. So anyway, it's really a regular thing. I'm getting behind or ahead of myself, and it doesn't really matter, I guess, because all these things just happen. Well, let me come back to that. As we would go to this rail station to get on the train to go to where we were going to have to work, we'd go in a long single file beside this coaling station, and the little piles of coal here and there and whatnot. And coming home, we'd do the same thing. Well, you learn to do a lot of things. One of the things we learned fairly early on was when you wore your coat, you wore it like a cape. You wore it over your shoulders, buttoned, and you left your arms free. And as we walked along, some of the guys reached down and grabbed a lump of coal. And at first, the German guards would holler at them. And after that, they quit doing that. They let everybody do that. What we had in each room, they had a big wooden box about that square, about that tall. And when we first got there, it was, of course, still in warm weather. It was, I guess, in September or something. At any rate, they had briquettes, coal briquettes, which were made out of coal dust or whatever. And this was used for the stove and for heating water for the latrine or whatever. And, excuse me. And they really didn't have very many of them, and they said they couldn't give us any more because when the weather started getting cool, we didn't have enough to keep the place warm. So that's when these guys started grabbing this coal. Well, we'd go in, and when we would get in the evening, those boxes, we'd fill them up. They'd be heaping over like this. And in the morning, we'd have burned down some of it. It would still be a full box. And when we come back in the evening, it'd be about half gone. So we were stealing from the Germans were stealing from us. So they didn't mind. They quit trying to stop us,
I had a question about, because when you were captured, you didn't have a shirt.
No, I had this field jacket on.
You didn't have a shirt.
Didn't have a shirt,
Now,
that's right.
You got a shirt somewhere along
Well, after the showers or whatnot, then they gave us, we got rid of all the clothes we were wearing.
They issued you clothes.
They issued us clothes, yeah.
What did they look like?
Well, seemed to me I had a jacket that had a bullet hole in the back of it, but it was a GI type jacket. Back then, we had what we called a field jacket, which was different than the we're using later on. That's another story. But I had a big diamond on the back that signified POW. Mm-hmm. And I don't know whether this was maybe a former English uniform or probably American uniform or whatnot. But their clothes they'd taken from other places. I guess maybe some of the same ones that had been taken off and then laundered and put back out. So.
Interesting. And they never did look at your dog tags.
Never did look at my dog tags.
And that's probably what kept them from ever finding out.
Yeah, except maybe you said you never looked at my dog tags. It may be that the H didn't mean anything to them. If it'd been a J for Jew, it would have. So, but maybe you never know. At any rate, strange enough, they issued me another dog tag, and it's just a kind of a square thing. It's I got a picture of it in the book. In fact, I still have it at home. And my number was Dryinoctic 659-ish. I could try to figure out what that is, but I'm not sure. Any rate.
When were you liberated?
I wasn't liberated.
Okay.
I escaped after the third attempt.
Really? Well, take us through those.
Well, before we get there, if you like, there's a couple of other things I might mention. To start with, you get to where you can do things. If we were walking beside a place that had cabbage, guys were pretty good about swiping cabbage. And one day, I have never liked rutabagas. Pardon me to the rutabaga world, but I can't stand them. At any rate, but I swiped some rutabagas one time, one nice big one. And on Sunday morning, we had the day was free. During the week, we had to work every day, but on Sunday, we had the day free. And, you would wash clothes or whatnot. We got to shower about once every so often. We had to go up to another place outside of the camp. I guess it's probably some of the railroad people stuff, and we'd get to take a shower. But otherwise, on Sunday morning, we'd take it easy. And they would take a group of about 4 or 5 guys and take an old wagon or whatnot, and go into the commissary and pick up the food for that day. The food, by the way, early on when we got there, our rations were 1/4 of a kilo of bread, a wedge like that, about that thick, a day, and Airsert's coffee, which I think was probably made out of barley, and bread, and a bowl of potatoes. I'll never forget, we had a bowl, a little brown bowl with a blue inside, and it was a lot of little potatoes, boiled potatoes like that, with peelings on them, And that was our daily ration. We got that once a day. And coffee, I guess we got it twice a day or whatever. At any rate, and you kept what you wanted to and whatnot. After a while, the potatoes got to be potato soup, and then the potato soup got to be thinner and thinner. We early on, they had given us once a week. We got a little patty of what we call bloodwurst. It was about that big around, about that thick, and I guess that was protein. That ended pretty soon. I guess really the Germans didn't have all that much there either. Later, when that soup got to be thinner and thinner, occasionally they would issue, instead of potato soup, some kind of gruel that it was made out of some kind of wheat or barley or something. I don't know what, but I didn't eat it. I mean, I didn't get that hungry. So, at any rate, coming back to these rutabagas I had stolen. So Sunday morning, I peeled this thing and cut it up and salted it. We had salt and whatnot, and I boiled it and cooked it and whatnot. And it looked real pretty, and I tasted it, and I gave the whole thing away, because I wasn't hungry enough to eat the rutabagas. One day, they had a group of us. Instead of working on the tracks, we were working in a kind of a barnyard down under the tracks, under a trestle. And we had 3 paratroopers in our group. And these guys were kind of aloof. They stayed to themselves. And, I mean, you didn't mess with those guys too much anyway. And one of them, there was a lot of big buck rabbits running around on the ground in this farmyard. And one of them apparently got one, killed him, and tucked him under his jacket and took it back into camp. And that night he dressed him and put the leavings down the latrine, and they cooked that baby over on that stove. It sure did smell good. But that's all we got. They ate the rabbit. All we got was the smell. But oh, me. Also, one of these three guys would go out at night. It was kind of an understanding. He'd go out. He went out at night, and he went under the fence. There was a group of Russian women that were also prisoners. There was some village somewhere close by. I don't know where, but he'd go under the fence, and about 9 o'clock, just before lights out, somebody would walk around our camp. Could have been me. Could have been anybody else, and start whistling. The Germans must have known this, but I don't know. At any rate, that was a signal for him to come back in. And he was never stopped.
Huh.
But anyway.
So he was going to visit the Russian women?
Yeah. Incidentally, speaking of them, from time to time we had to move one of these rails, iron rails that the trains ran on. And you do it by, they had some tongs that would clamp onto the rail like that with a handle. And it'd take, probably 8 of us, 4 on either side, to move a rail. The rail was pretty long. And look down the tracks where these Russian women were working. 4 of them would pick up one and walk off with it, just nothing to it. They were something else. They looked like they were well fed with potatoes. At any rate, but so I guess there were other things. Oh, one other thing we were required to relocate a very large switch, rail that had all these different pieces to it and whatnot. It took a lot of us to do it, but we dug it, we unhooked it and did whatever, and we moved it, I don't know, maybe 30, 40, 50 feet, I don't know how far, but not too far. And we tried to do our bit for the German war effort. We buried a few rakes and pitchforks and hockers and whatnot in that gravel under that rail when we were filling it back up. Would you believe about 2 weeks later, they required we move that thing back, and we dug all that equipment back up again. So,
well, tell us about your escape attempts.
Okay, I might tell you first, if you'd like for me to,
Sure.
before I tell you about the escape attempts. We were working near the Czech border on near a town called Bad Elster, and this was right near the Czech border. At any rate, one day there was a inn right beside the track, and they let us stop there at lunch. Now, not to go in the inn, but there wasn't anything we wasn't going anywhere, I guess, and so they we were kind of free at it, and we had our whatever lunch we'd brought along, I guess, and I wandered into the kitchen in this place, and I've never played poker in my life, but one night in camp, these guys were always sitting around playing poker. One night in camp, one guy says, "Look, if you'll sit down here, I'll tell you what to do, and you'll play." And I says, "Well, what the heck?" And the Germans had been paying us 32 marks a month for working, so I had some marks. Wasn't good for anything. At any rate, so I ended up by winning a whole roll of marks. And I had them in my pocket, and this lady said, in sign language or whatever, "Would you like some soup?" And I had a delicious bowl of soup. It was, really, it was kind of cold outside, and I really enjoyed it. And I tried to pay her, and she I was going to give it. I said, "Well, just, take the whole wad." And she said, "Oh, you don't think our money is worth anything?" All this in sign language. She said, "You want to put it in the fire." She was insulted, but at any rate, I don't know what. Maybe I gave her the whole wad of money. I don't know. It didn't mean anything to me. walking out of there, I bumped into a German German soldier who was obviously on leave or whatnot, because I think he was on crutches. I've forgotten what, but he was obviously had been wounded, whatnot. And then I was wearing this watch that the Germans had missed very openly, and short sleeve or whatever, I guess, or rolled up. And he, can't remember which arm my watch is on. He saw the watch and he wanted to buy it. He wasn't saying he would take it, he wanted to buy it, and he offered me 100 cigars, which like 100 cigarettes, which was like gold. I said, no, my mother and my father had given it to me. And by then, you had some pidgin German that you could speak, or pig German as we called it. At any rate, he didn't pursue it, but he sure did want that watch, but I still have it. After that, the Americans came over not too long after that and bombed this bridge that was over the Elbe River. That and am I taking too much time?
No, that's fine.
As this you've seen in the picture books, these bridges with the kind of expansions underneath the stone bridge. Well, I think this had one or two rails going across the river, and they knocked a whale of a hole in the middle of it. Now, they didn't knock the whole bridge out, but they messed it up pretty badly. And incidentally, I don't know whether maybe one or maybe two bombs hit the bridge. That was all, but the whole area looked like pictures we've seen of the moon, with these pock marks all over around at any rate. So we were required to go and repair the bridge. And we'd taken, they'd back the work train onto the bridge, and we'd get off and work then. And I got picked along with 3 other guys, I think it was, to work with some stonemasons. And what they were doing, they had this tremendously high scaffold. And this was now in February, I guess, so it was pretty cold. And up on top of this bridge where the wind was blowing, you might think that was a pretty tough duty. And what we were doing, we were taking a jackhammer and blowing and drilling holes up in the stone overhead, and then they'd blow cement in it to reinforce the bridge. At any rate, what we'd do, we'd have to climb up this what do you call it, scaffold, and we were up there working. But the neat thing about it was they had a kind of an open grate sitting on the platform filled with coke. Excuse me, and what do you call it? A fire, a coke fire, and it was warm. I mean, the wind blowing through there just kept that thing red hot all the time. And they would stop for free stick for breakfast, and we'd go down the what do you call it, the scaffold, and they had a little hut down at the bottom, and we'd sit down there, and they always had their little lunch box with their little bit of bread and a little bit of margarine and some coffee. And we'd sit there and we'd just look at them, and they'd eat. And, got to be friends, I guess, at any rate. So one day they came out, and one offered us an apple and one offered us something else. And it got to be better duty than working up on top. And we'd go back up and come back down. Not so long after that, well, I guess it's in early April, one Sunday morning, we were doing the typical Sunday morning thing. Oh, got to tell you one other thing. We were, one earlier Sunday morning, I was on the duty team going in to get the rations. And by the way, we could buy beer with those marks. It was Sucker beer. That had saccharin in it, and it had the alcohol removed for the German war effort. So we'd buy a keg of beer and we'd bring it in. And the Germans used to tell us, we always liked, ice, cold beer, and that's the way you drank it at any rate. And the German says, no, it'll make you sick, like that. So we'd leave it outside and let it get cold, but at any rate. But this particular Sunday morning that I was on the detail, the guard went in to check on something, and myself and another guy saw a place, and we went down inside, thought we'd do a little exploring, see what we could find to eat, to steal anyway. And didn't have much regard for their laws, didn't matter, And I found a whole bin of carrots. Now, you learned, among other things, I told you about your coat, where you could carry things under your arm. And you learned to also tie your pants at the bottom around your ankles. That way, you could always put things in your pants leg. And I was loaded with carrots when I came out, and the German guard saw me and recognized it and made me put them back. But I got a nickname from then on as Carrots. Oh, one other thing, talking about the bread. We had 1 day or 2 days off or whatever it was for Christmas. And coming back to the camp just before, we were off duty for Christmas, I think I must have brought 8 loaves of bread in for different people. I was really loaded with it. The Germans never really stopped us too much, but one day, and this is even earlier on than that, one of the German guards, I think he kind of had an idea. For some reason, he was headed in for one of the guys, and he searched him and found a loaf of bread on him. And he called the corporal out. The corporal came out and says, "You must share with your comrades." And he took a big butcher knife, and he walked through the camp all the way through like this, and sliced a slice of bread and give it to, handing them out to, said, "You must share with your comrades all the way through." What he didn't realize was there was another POW walking behind him, picking it all up. When he got all through, the guy whose loaf of bread it was got it back, except he got it back sliced. On early April, I started to say, somewhere early April, I can't really, timing can't quite get, but Sunday morning, 4 P-47s or P-51s, I don't remember what, but came in low over the camp, and we heard these airplanes coming, and all of a sudden we heard the machine guns. And you're talking about guys really trying to find cracks in the floor to dive into. We did, under tables and anything else. And what they were doing, they were shooting at these engines that were at the roundhouse. And they really shot them up. There's one poor sucker, though, that was standing up in a window of the roundhouse with a machine gun shooting at them, and they just plastered that whole section of the roundhouse with cannon fire. But I think one ricochet fell in our camp, and that was all. But the German corporal ran out, opened the gate, and ran back and crawled under the stove. But that afternoon, they made us leave the camp, and we went out into the woods. And we were, I guess, out in the woods for a couple of days. And I may have my timing. It may have been a little bit farther into April than that. I don't really remember. But at any rate, and after we were out there for a couple of 3 days, German Hitler Youth started coming out with automatic rifles, and you're talking about 10 and 12-year-olds with machine pistols and whatnot. They were dangerous. At any rate, they were herding us back into the camp, which we went back to. And I don't know if you've heard about this, but you probably have. Toward the end of the war, the Germans would, if they had prisoners of war that were close to the Russians, where the Russians were coming in from the east, they would take the prisoners out and put them on the road, and they had no place for them, so they would walk them toward the west. And where they were coming toward from the Americans and British coming from the west, they'd take those out and walk them toward the east, so they were going back and forth like this. Well, they were about to do the same thing with us. And I had developed it wasn't really all that bad, but I developed a kind of a sore on the top of my foot, one of my feet. And I told the German corporal I was going up to the French Riviera that was up on the hill. That was a little clinic that was there for the prisoners for that whole area, British, American, New Zealand, whatever. At any rate, he said, go ahead, which was kind of strange, but at any rate, I went up there, and the French doctor, it was operated by a French doctor and a French padre, and they had a few bunks and a little day room area and whatnot, and some people there, and he, dressed my foot. He says, you want to stay in? I said, sure. So I crawled, he says, that's your bunk over there. So I crawled in on the bunk. Well, that night, 2 German soldiers came in, and I know what they were doing. They were looking for me because I hadn't come back to the camp. And everybody said, no, they didn't know anything about me. So, they finally left. So I was left up there. Well, I was there for a couple of days, and then the French doctor one morning says, now, I'm going to take 4 of you to within 1 kilometer of the front line, of the lines. And then you can go from there. And we would do it by cutting cards. And I happened to be one of the 4 that got one of the cards. So it was me and I think maybe another American and me and an English guy, I think, and maybe a New Zealander and Australian. And the next morning, and we started out this very, quote, circuitous route. And we ended up in a deep woods, so to speak. And there we met a whole bunch of French prisoners. Now these guys had boxes and bags and pots and pans, and I'd always heard that French soldiers were excellent infantrymen. These looked like a bunch of cattle. I mean, and going through the woods, they sound like a bunch of cattle. Well, the doctor says, okay, you guys go with these fellas and they'll take you through the lines, and just go with them. So, what are you going to do? We said, okay, thank you. So we started out, and they headed west, I guess it was, and we got close to a clearing. And just as we went out into the clearing, the German soldiers came out of their foxholes and stopped us and took us back in. And, and so they took us back to some little schoolhouse, of all things, that was empty, and said, okay, you wait here, and somebody will be here to get you. Well, there was us and the Frenchies, and there was some other people. They were up on kind of the stage when a lot of their gear was up there. Everybody's traveling with whatever they've got. That's another whole world. But at any rate, after a while, after the Germans left, the people up on the stage just left everything they had and they took off. Well, this was like manna from heaven for these French guys. They all bounded up on the stage to see what they could find to add to all what they already had. This was, a new treasure. Well, while they were doing that, the 4 of us eased out of there. We headed back toward what we felt like was toward the camp. Well, we got to one place where we saw some German soldiers with looked like a field kitchen. And we walked over there, and I guess a little brazen, but we asked if we could have some food, and they said, sure. And we got in line, and, they gave us something to eat off of, and we had a meal. I sat down, and one of the German soldiers came over to us and said, now look, you have to be careful. You better get off the road because the SS was wandering around, and if they found any prisoners that they found loose, they'd just shoot them on spot. I don't know, somehow or another that didn't bother us too much one way or the other. We went on back, and we finally got back to the camp, and they said, what are you doing back here? And we told them, so we spent the night. And I said to the New Zealander and the Kiwi, I was in the Kiwi the next morning at whatever breakfast we had. I said, look, you know, we know where we've been. We know how to get there. Why don't we just do it on our own? So we did. And when we got to the point where we knew where the German outposts were, we just moved down to the right about 2,000 feet and said, you know, we head for that clump of woods across the clearing, and you know, I guess in your mind you said, what could happen? Either they shoot you in the back, you keep walking, or they stop you. Well, so we headed out. We didn't run. We just took it easy, and nobody hollered. Nothing happened. So we went across, and we got into this little clump of woods, and we looked way down the hill down there, way off in the distance. There was a little town. We said, well, if the town's there, we know the Germans must be in that town. So we said, no, we better go. And there was an Autobahn, you know, like an expressway running across. So we headed in the other direction across it. That was our mistake. The town was held by Americans. When we got, just as we were crossing the Autobahn, there wasn't any traffic on it, but some guy hollered at us, and it was a German soldier waving for us to. He obviously had an automatic rifle in his hand. So, you know, what are you going to do? But we went up there. He took us back to their camp, and I'll end up here in a minute. Am I going too long? At any rate, so he took us back to where they had an encampment and conferred with their superiors. Then he took us to a little town, to a little jail. And on the way there, he spoke fairly good English. We were trying to get him to surrender to us and give himself up. We said the war is nearly over, you know, and so forth. And he says, oh no, in 2 weeks I'm going back to Berlin to visit my girlfriend. He wasn't having any part of that. So they took us to this little jail, and they told us to get in this cell, and they didn't lock the door, they just closed it. And the next morning, the jailer, and you got to understand that this is right toward the end of things. Next morning, the jailer gave us some coffee, and we took off, and we figured if we head west to look which way the sun was, we'd find the American lines. And we stayed off the roads, and we walked through the day and whatnot, and that night we found a woods to sleep in. And, you know, being good Boy Scouts, I guess we learned we could take our shoes off and curl up in a ball as close as we could, and we could stay warm. We figured in the woods nobody would see us. Well, when we woke up the next morning, we were about as far as just a short distance from a road. The woods were just as clean as they could be. You could see under all the way across. But nobody had bothered us, so we got out on the road and started walking. And we just decided in that case we walked on the road, and we began to see houses with white flags, and the more and more. And then we got to a place where 2 GIs jumped out of the ditch on either side and stopped us. And these were from the whatever division it was. But anyway, excuse me. They stopped us and wanted to know, who are you? And well, the kind of outfit I told them I was an American GI, and they looked at me and the clothes I was wearing. They wasn't real sure about that. And I showed them my dog tags and my GI dog tags, and then they did, and I introduced them to these other 2 guys, who was a New Zealander and the Australian, and then they took us back to where the captain was or whatever, and first time I'd ever had a drink of whiskey in my life, and this guy says, you want black and white or white horse? And I said, either one. But from that, to end this thing up, those guys went on wherever, I guess, to join their units, and I kind of hitchhiked and worked my way back across Germany. to finally got back to Reims and was from there flown to Le Havre. First time I'd been in an airplane, and to a camp called Lucky Strike. The U.S. had set up these camps that for repatriating POWs, and there was a lot of complaining going on after we got there, and the camp commander got up on a platform one Wednesday morning and said, I want to explain to you, we'll get you home as quick as we can, but this camp has grown from 11,000 to 60,000 since last Saturday. And so a couple of weeks we were put on a Liberty ship and headed home.
Now, just very quickly, one more question. What did you do with your GI Bill?
Well, I went back to Georgia. I did not take full advantage of it. Somehow or another, I went to ag school, and somehow or another it just didn't gel for me, and I finally went home, and so I didn't finish Georgia.
And how did you end up in Atlanta?
Well, after I was in a family farming business, lived in town in Edenton, and we had some farms outside. Myself and my brother-in-law, who had come down from up north, and myself and my mother and whatnot, we had a poultry processing business that had developed that over a period of time, but things wasn't really as great as they ought to be, and we had a child and whatnot, and felt like that there'd be more advantages in Atlanta. And so I had some encouragement from my in-laws. My wife had grown, she was born in Macon, but she grew up here in Atlanta. And so I came to Atlanta and went in the real estate business, and 40 years later I retired. Oh, 45, yeah.
We got just a couple more minutes to tape. You got any specific?
I don't think I have any more questions.
One very quick one. Can you tell me what you thought was the best piece of equipment the Army issued you, and what was the worst?
I guess the M1 rifle was the best. And I don't know what the worst was, because that's really, you see, that was really that was my friend. That was all I had.
Did one other thing, when you landed in Normandy, landed on the beaches, quickly describe what you were carrying.
Everything I owned. A rifle, a pack with clothes, socks and whatnot, and canteen equipment, like, cup and plate and whatnot, and cigarettes and ammunition, and I had that bag with rifle grenades, and of course I was ammunition of other sorts.
Were you carrying a gas mask?
Yeah, I guess so. I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, I guess we all did. Got rid of that probably somewhere not too long after that.
That was one of the things you read about, is that GIs would quickly dispose of the mask, but they kept the bag.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about the bag. I think I just got rid of the whole thing.